for stability and security in the region. After the war is won, and then we have the possibility of having more of that in the region.
Well, I think it's a must, Romania was one of the countries that were very much in favor and pushing towards a more NATO presence or more NATOization of the Black Sea. And we have constantly promoted on the agenda of the alliance proposals in that regard. Of course, as we speak now, during the war, it is difficult to have a NATO naval presence as such in the Black Sea, just in order not to be, another irritant factor that might complicate things. But this cannot stay as such forever, and I think a more NATO presence in the Black Sea in the form of exercises, in the form of increased cooperation among the riparian NATO countries plus non-riparian NATO countries, I think this is very much needed. And I think this is an avenue that we have to follow, we have to explore. And this is about the naval presence, but of course, in the Black Sea region, already we witness an increase of NATO presence on land and in the air. This is clear. This is also part of the vigilance measures in the context of the war of Russia against Ukraine. So it is already here or there.
The dynamics are visible.
The dynamic is visible, and I think we have to continue on this path.
I'll take one last question on my side before I open up to the audience for the questions. Crimea. We hear during the conference as well a firm reaffirmation of the concept these days that it's not just helping Ukraine to withstand Russian aggression, but the strategic outcome of assistance to Ukraine should be the victory of Ukraine, so that Russia loses the war and Ukraine wins the war, because it's not just resilience of Ukraine that we are after, so that they can stand during the times of this brutal invasion. And within that concept, there are different definitions that different sides might have what the victory means. And it's quite certain that for Ukraine, it's the same for Georgia, I can tell from our side as well, that the victory means the full liberation of Ukraine, and Crimea is part of Ukraine. And that's a concept that is based on understanding of the rules and norms and sovereignty of the country. But my question is, even from pragmatic point of view, if you talk about the regional stability in the long run, how one can ensure that having Crimea militarized in the way that it is by Russia and used as a forepost, so to say, for undermining the security of the Black Sea region, without that factor being gone in the context of Ukraine's victory. So how Crimea, in a pragmatic sense as well, is essential for long-lasting security, and with that, uninterrupted maritime connectivity, trade from the region, including for the food security at a global scale, for that actually to be accomplished as an outcome in this war?
Well, I think the answer is very complex, and Crimea means a lot of things. First of all, it's the symbol of the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And I think for Ukraine, this is a red line. And I think it's up to Ukraine to define what is the victory. What is the definition of victory belongs to Ukraine, because Ukraine is the victim of an aggression and Russia is the aggressor. So in terms of what is not only, from the international law point of view correct, but also from the moral point of view, what is correct, what is just in this whole context. I think it's for Ukraine to decide what is the definition of victory. If for them the definition of victory is full restoration of their territorial integrity, I think it's their right to be so. And I think this is also a factor of motivation for their fight. In fact, for their resilience, I think it's important that they have the courage, they have the determination. Nobody can take this courage and determination from their minds and from their souls. I think this is a factor which, leads them towards victory. And at the end of the day, of course, we have to take into account what Crimea means in terms of security for us. As we speak, Crimea is the point of projection of anti-access area denial in larger parts of the Black Sea. At the same time, it is a military platform with a lot of military resources of Russia over there, which allows force projection towards Central Europe, towards East Mediterranean, towards Middle East. So it's not as simple as, just a peninsula in the Black Sea. As far as Romania is concerned, Crimea is some, 200 nautical miles from Constanța, so it's not that far. This is a risk of security for NATO. And from this perspective, well, I think the answer is very complex. At the same time, Crimea is, as I mentioned, a red line for Ukraine. It might be also a red line for Russia as we speak. So indeed, there is a very complex answer to this question. But there is no doubt that as far as victory is concerned, the definition belongs to Ukraine.
Thank you. I'll open up the possibility to the audience now to raise questions. If you would want to address Minister with the question, this is the moment for you to do so. So I'm attentive to hands. No. Yeah, please. If you could introduce yourself as well quickly. Do we have mics for the audience? So maybe we can hear you anyway. Yeah.
Or is it more like political symbolism?
Was the question audible to you fully?
Partly. Can you say it again, please, now with the mic?
Yeah. Yes, of course. So my name's Sophie Witte. I used to serve in the German Navy, and I would be interested in how would you assess the role of activating the Standing NATO Maritime Group in the Mediterranean, but it's also sometimes doing exercises in the Black Sea, or at least it used to do that. So what's the role of activating that into the Maritime Very High Readiness Joint Task Force?
Well, I think the role of the Standing Maritime Group is very important because with the air capabilities of the group, it's covering a lot of the airspace over the Black Sea and the Black Sea allies. So it is important. For the fact that, well, for the time being, it cannot enter the Black Sea, well, this is part of the, let's say, caution that we need to exercise during this wartime, just in order not to bring another more irritant factor in the whole equation, which is already very complicated. But as I mentioned before, this cannot stay like this forever. After the war is over, I think we cannot and we should not accept absolutely no naval NATO presence in the Black Sea. This is inconceivable from the point of view of NATO security.
Any more questions? Yeah, please.
I'm Gabriela von Habsburg. I'm the former ambassador of Georgia to Germany. I'm interested how you see the situation in this whole Black Sea situation with Georgia, how it is politically drifting, and what impact can the EU make in order to see that this is not going to completely into the Russian sphere in order to keep other stability in the Black Sea?
Well, I know Georgia for quite a long time, and I want to say that the Romanian and the Georgian people are very close to each other, even if we are on the opposite shores of the Black Sea. Last year, we have concluded a strategic partnership between Romania and Georgia, so we have elevated the level of relations between us at this strategic level because we do have a strategic character relationship. And we know very well the Georgian people, and I think there is no chance whatsoever that the Georgian people would accept falling into a Russian sphere of influence. Of course, now Georgia is having or being recognized a European perspective, not yet state candidate status for the European Union. Romania has supported very strongly the candidate status and European perspective of Georgia last year. I think, I was talking yesterday with the Georgian foreign minister. I think there is progress on the implementation of the benchmarks which were introduced by the European Commission in the 17th of June opinion, which recommended European perspective for Georgia. Of course, there is a lot of work to be done. We know from our own experience of accession to the European Union, the transition towards democratic and European values, it's difficult, it's not easy to be done. But with the assistance of friends, of partners, with the assistance of the European Union as a whole and of the member states, I think all difficulties should be, overpassed. Of course, this also requires political will, but I will stop here with my comment.
Thank you. And then we would definitely hope for that shift reflected in the progress to be palpable, because Georgian people as such in the society have done a lot to be in the engine, sort of the forefront for some time when it comes to EU integration processes. And that moment when we didn't receive the candidate status, for the reasons especially why it happened, was an extremely painful moment for many of us. And hopefully we will overcome those challenges so that we could proudly be still at the sort of forefront of this movement. Part of what we see now as a challenge that you've briefly touched as an impact during the war, when it comes to the trade relations as well, maybe you could expand a bit more so that audience could hear it more, what it meant for Romania to adjust to the new reality, to support by that others. I've been traveling to Moldova quite some time after the war, visiting refugee centers there as well, and then impact of war economically on Moldova. Moldova was dependent so much on Odessa port, and then it not only Moldova. But logistically speaking, it should have been a nightmare, so that how much of a governmental effort was needed at a time to support that shift so that you could serve the needs that you were not ready to perhaps at that moment. And do you feel that you received support at that time that was needed from the EU, or maybe more is needed so that logistically as well you have more capabilities that could serve the needs that might stay there for some time for you to be providing to maintain that traffic and then volume of trade even?
Yes, the challenges were very high, and well, we have to understand the fact that for Romania the challenges are higher, and were higher and are higher because we are the EU and NATO member state having the longest border with Ukraine. And because of that, we had to, and we have embraced with our hearts and minds open, the many refugees who came from Ukraine directly into Romania or through the Republic of Moldova. Since the beginning of the war until now, over 3.5 million Ukrainian refugees have crossed the border of Romania. And out of them, 110,000 are staying permanently already in Romania. All of them were met with well, all availability. We have provided free access to the medical care system. We have provided free access to the job market. We have provided free access to education, free transport on the public transportation system. So the effort, both from the logistic point of view and from the financial point of view, was very high. Then we have created a humanitarian hub in the northern part of Romania in order to facilitate the transit of international humanitarian aid towards Ukraine. And more than 70 convoys with around 400 trucks were already sent through that humanitarian hub through Romania towards Ukraine. And then it was the transit of grain and agricultural products that I have already mentioned. Basically, we had to improve our roads, our railways. We have to increase the capacities and modernize capacities of our ports on the Danube. We have to increase the capacity of the Constanța port, which is the largest European port for grain export outside the European Union. And the effort was huge. The effort continues. Now, in the last couple of months, we have opened 3 new more cross-border points with Ukraine just in order to facilitate more transit towards Romania. And this effort continues. I mentioned that 13 million tons of grain and other products have transited Romania. This means over around 60% of the whole quantity which was transited through the solidarity lanes of the European Union. So this is an effort. As far as the Republic of Moldova is concerned, the effort was quite high as well, because the Republic of Moldova was the most affected country in the region by the war in Ukraine. The number of refugees per capita is the highest in Europe, and the financial effort was extremely high. We tried to help by taking refugees directly from the border between Ukraine and the Republic of Moldova to Romania. We have created a sort of a green lane in order not to, well, overburden the Republic of Moldova with more Ukrainian refugees. When the Russians started to bomb the energy infrastructure in Ukraine in October, well, Moldova was unable to import any more electricity from Ukraine, so Romania had to jump in, and we are providing since October between 80% and 90% of the electricity needs of the overall Republic of Moldova, which is another huge, I would say, effort from our side. We have provided direct budgetary assistance. We have provided assistance by grants through means of projects for developing rural areas and the education system in the Republic of Moldova. We have an agreement on 100 million euro grants for such kind of projects. We are now developing a system of a series of training for Moldovan officials in order to help them in the process of negotiation for accession to the European Union. So the effort is quite comprehensive, very comprehensive, and the list can continue. Last year we have created, together with France and Germany, the Moldova Support Platform, which is an instrument for gathering financial assistance to the Republic of Moldova. We had already 3 such meetings in Berlin in April, in Bucharest in July, and in Paris in November. And the next one will be in Chisinau in April. And we managed to gather quite an important amount of money, especially trying to help the efforts of the government in Chisinau to cope with the energy security challenges. But at the same time, this platform is useful through its working groups in order to support the reform efforts necessary for the European integration process. They are doing the same as the Georgians are doing in terms of trying to fulfill those benchmarks which were established by the European Commission in the 17th of June opinion, which proposed the granting of the candidate status.
If we switch to, and I'm scanning the audience as well, so that please feel free at any time to raise their hand, so that you are the priority when it comes to the questions, not me raising questions, but in the hard security field, for understandable reasons, we are now focused on the short term when it comes to winning the war, in terms of attention for Ukraine, and then by that to establish a lasting security in the region. But if we think about how best we could prepare for that future, part of it is training of the human resource, military, Navy, or not only Navy, Air Forces as well, which most of us don't have in the region that much developed, meaning Georgia, no NATO member countries at least that I can speak of. Ukraine standouts with the capacities, they have capabilities, but it's not match obviously for the superiority in this field that Russia still has when it comes to air forces, air defense that be, or air forces per se. What we hear frequently when we speak about equipment that is needed for the war effort for Ukraine, and I'm wearing myself a T-shirt with F-16s, let's rock for Ukraine. There's this whole movement now in Ukraine, obviously, and Ukraine, Friends of Ukraine, to push for that now when it comes to air capacities and capabilities that Ukraine might have. And it's clear that there is a lot of training that is needed to operate this equipment, right? And then in some cases it takes years to master fully, to really use in an effective way equipment like that. Do you think that it's already time for countries that are not members of NATO, but are aspirants, and then in the case of Ukraine and Georgia, decision of NATO was already made in 2008 that both Ukraine and Georgia will be eventually members of NATO, for us to have an opening to be trained for using equipment that we might not have yet? And it could be air, it could be maritime capacities, it could be land when it comes to tanks as well, so that the military from countries that at least are known to be aspiring and then to be expected as part of the club could already start training for those equipment, so that the time is well used for that moment when we are in, and then we might have more of those capabilities that would make us interoperable to the fullest when it comes to the equipment with NATO forces.
Well, I think it's a very interesting idea and proposal. I don't think this was examined or considered by now by NATO or by NATO allies as such. And I'm not an expert in military planning, but I think it's an idea that it's worth exploring. So let's ask our military to study this idea.
Sure, because the question will be very relevant at the time when equipment could be transferable and available, and then so that for the question of not being capable to run those equipment, for that not to be an impediment at the time in this case. Let's switch to the US. We spoke about NATO and EU as sort of alliances per se, and then organization as EU is. But how do you see the level of, how would you assess the level of engagement of the US? US, there was, we've had ups and downs of close engagement of US in the region. How would you assess it now? I mean, how much US is focused on the region? Because of the war, and perhaps beyond the war as well, when it comes to Black Sea area.
Well, I think after the war started, the focus on the region by the United States has clearly become very visible. And I would speak on behalf of Romania, on my country's experience after the war. So at the beginning of the war in Romania, there were some, I think, 900, 1,000 American troops based in my country. After the war, as we speak now, I think there are 3,000 more troops from United States on the territory of Romania. And this speaks volumes about the solidarity in very concrete terms between allies, between the United States and the security of the allies on the eastern flank. I think this is important, and this speaks a lot about the commitment of the United States for our security. At the same time, you are familiar, of course, probably with the B9, the Bucharest 9 format. The Bucharest 9 format is the format which is an informal one, gathering the allies from the eastern flank, the 9 allies of the eastern flank. It was created by the President of Romania, Mr. Iohannis, and the President of Poland, Mr. Duda, back in 2015. And the purpose of this format was to not to create a separate grouping within the alliance, but to gather the allies from the eastern flank, which know better the security environment influenced by Russia's aggressive behaviors, and to propose within the alliance concrete measures in order to enforce the eastern flank and to facilitate consensus building within the alliance. Well, in the context of the war of Russia against Ukraine, the Bucharest 9 format became a very valuable format, not only for consultation among the countries from the eastern flank, but also for transatlantic coordination. The United States have used heavily, I would say, this format for consulting the allies on the eastern flank on various measures, on the evolutions of the war in Ukraine, on the evolutions of the security in general, influenced by the war in Ukraine, and so on. And, well, next week we will have another such gathering in Poland. President Biden will meet the B9 leaders in order to discuss about, again, the same very important issues related to the evolution of the war of Russia against Ukraine. So this shows that the involvement of the United States in the region and for the, well, interests of the countries in the region is quite significant. And the fact that the US administration and Congress are supporting the development of a US Black Sea strategy. This shows that indeed Black Sea is now, as we have discussed at the beginning, really on the agenda of the most important capitals in the world.
Very, very good. And then final question from my side, future. And then if we speak about the future post-war, meaning after victory of Ukraine, and even prior to that, elements of that when it comes to economic bounce back and resilience, so to say, of Ukraine, how would you assess the conversations and plannings that are ongoing right now within the EU and beyond for reconstruction and rebuilding of Ukraine? Because if you would think about the stability of the region, that's an inevitable part of that. How Ukraine comes back as a resilient, vibrant society with comeback of Ukraine's powerful economy and then potential of that, and that being a conduit, so to say, for the regional developments as well in terms of its own stability, economic prosperity, and development. It will be a massive effort that will be needed, cooperation between public and private entities in this case. No public funds or efforts could cover it all that will be needed. But do you see that there is already meaningful conversations that are happening around that theme. Yes, I understand that the war is still ongoing. We need to get to that point when one can put full-fledged effort in this direction. And by the way, anybody who travels these days to Ukraine, I just came 1 week before after staying in Kiev for 2 weeks. It's remarkable how much effort for fast recovery is already ongoing, building up the bridges and roads and then damage that is inflicted on infrastructure. But we speak about the real big recovery and rebuilding. And thinking ahead of that time could be useful to be ready for that moment and not to start from the zero ground at the time when the moment opens up for that rebuilding and construction. How would you assess? Are we talking enough about that already or planning for it as much as we could?
Well, I think it's a very important conversation, and this is because, as you mentioned, the effort will be huge. And the financial dimension of reconstruction of Ukraine, again, will be huge. It is very difficult now, even now, to foresee exactly this, the full dimensions of these lines of effort. And that's why I think it's important that we already started the Lugano conference, the other meetings which took place at the end of the year, the Paris conference and so on. All these are important moments in the process of preparation for the reconstruction. There is a clear need for increased international coordination in terms of shaping the reconstruction effort of Ukraine. But at the same time, I think the effort now should go towards helping Ukraine to resist the aggression. And it is very difficult to start the actual reconstruction process in areas which are at the same time, as we speak, bombed by the Russians. And civilian infrastructure continues to be destroyed. And I think the Russians will continue to follow this pattern of destroying the civilian infrastructure because they think that in this way the societal resilience in Ukraine will be broken, which was a wrong assumption by now. I think the effect is opposite from the morale of the population point of view. But still, I think they will continue with this tactic. And under these circumstances, it is difficult to follow this this reconstruction effort in full swing right now. I think what we have to focus on as we speak is to repair what is essential in order to make the life of the population bearable, to make sure that the living conditions are acceptable under the standards, of course, of a war-torn society. But this effort has to continue. Let's take the example of restoration of electricity in parts of Ukraine. It is this huge effort, which is and it is a coordination effort, which started in Bucharest last November during the NATO Foreign Ministerial, which I have hosted at the end of November. I have also hosted a G7 Plus meeting dedicated to the energy security of Ukraine. And this coordination of the G7 Plus countries was very important because it is important to see how many generators, how many spare parts for various electric transformers or whatever very complicated technical electricity equipment is needed. So this effort is important, and of course in the meantime we have to continue to plan for the actual reconstruction of the country.
Well, thank you, Minister, very much for this very engaging and illuminating conversation. It's been very, very important for me as well to hear all of the feedback that you could provide about the ongoing negotiations and conversations that you have within the NATO, EU, and then expectations in this direction. I could only wish that in not a long distance time period of time when we will be gathering here at the conference and talking about the Black Sea, we will be talking about the region which inspires with already delivered success stories when it comes to winning the peace, winning the victory, and then establishing prosperity for the people in the region in the way that could be branded as stable, predictable in that sense, and then something that provides a greater security beyond the region as well, because indeed, as we have seen now, Black Sea matters beyond Black Sea as a region as well. For us, it's the core, but not only for those who are part of the Black Sea. Security in this region matters. Thank you very much, and I wish you luck in your endeavors and then success.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.